Hi, this is Bio156, Appendix A, Human Tissues, Part 3, Muscle Tissue. This is video 2 of 4. In this video, we'll discuss skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is found in the muscles that are connected to your skeleton, your skeletal muscles. These are the ones that allow you to walk and talk and chew food and move around. They're the ones under your conscious control. And in skeletal muscle, the cells are very long, and like in all muscle tissue, the cells are referred to as muscle fibers. This micrograph here shows several muscle cells, but only part of them. So there's part right here. This is part of a muscle cell right here. This is another part of a muscle cell right here. And there's a fourth one that we can see a little bit off to the side here. So the muscle cells themselves, the muscle fibers, can be as long as the muscle itself, 40 centimeters or more sometimes. And so on a slide or a drawing, you're only seeing part of the cells. It gets cut off. So here, since they're running up and down in this micrograph, they get cut off at the top and bottom of this picture here. In a drawing of a skeletal muscle cell, you'll notice that there are bundles of contractile proteins. Each bundle is called a myofibril. So if we look at one of these, if we pull one of these myofibrils out and look at it, we would see that there are contractile proteins that are arranged in groupings. You can see the kind of green lines here represent different bundles of contractile proteins. So there's one bundle right here. It ends at this green zigzag line here. There's another bundle right here. And these groupings are called sarcomeres. So each muscle itself, like your biceps or your quadriceps muscle, is composed of bundles of muscle fibers. So each bundle, if we zoom in on one of these bundles, we would see that each has many muscle fibers. And this can be, again, a very long bundle consisting of very long muscle fibers. And then if we zoom in on one of those muscle fibers, we would see, again, lots of those groupings of contractile proteins called myofibrils. And within each myofibril, there are many sarcomeres, which are groupings of contractile proteins. Each sarcomere contains actin and myosin filaments, which we talked about in the first video of this section. And those thin filaments are made up of actin, and the thick filaments are made up of myosin. And the sarcomeres are attached to each other at these Z lines or Z discs, which are the darker lines that you see in this micrograph right here that's zoomed in on a sarcomere. And the arrangement here of those thin and thick filaments in this regular structure in the sarcomere is what causes the striations that we see in micrographs of muscle tissues. Striations are stripes or bands. And so you'll see, as we look at some of these micrographs, you'll see these stripes or striations of light and dark bands in the muscle tissue, and it'll run all along the length of the muscle cell. And those are caused by this arrangement of the actin and myosin filaments in sarcomeres. In skeletal muscle, the muscle cells, muscle fibers, are parallel to each other, and they're surrounded by connective tissue that holds the cells together into bundles. Each cell has multiple nuclei. So not just one nucleus, but multiple. That's weird, right? We don't usually see that in most cells, but that does happen here in skeletal muscle cells, and that happens because of the way that the muscle cells are formed. They're actually formed from multiple cells that fuse together. And so those nuclei then get pushed to the outside, the periphery of the cell. So they're not actually outside the cell, rather they're just pushed to the edge. So they kind of bulge out a little bit at the edge of the cell. And they look kind of like elongated, lengthened ovals, kind of squished in longitudinal sections where we're looking lengthwise at the cells, like this one right here. And then if we look at a cross section where we cut the cell and we look, if we turned this and looked at that cut edge there, that would be a cross section. And the nuclei in skeletal muscles are never in the center of the cell in these cross sections. And then we mentioned that we have striations or bands in the muscle cells. So if you look at this drawing here, you can see there are bands of light and dark. Those are the striations. And they are oriented perpendicular to the longitudinal axis of the cell. So the cell is running lengthwise back and forth this way, and the striations are found perpendicular. So in this case, they would be going up and down like this, since the cell is running right to left. Now there are a couple of special names that we give to some of the features of the cell in muscle cells. The plasma membrane is called the sarcolemma, and the cytoplasm is called the sarcoplasm. This prefix sarco, that means flesh. And flesh, most of the flesh of your body, a lot of what you think of as flesh, is muscle tissue. When you're eating meat, you're eating flesh, which is mostly muscle tissue. So sarco refers to flesh, and that's a prefix that's often used in relation to muscles. Here we're looking at a micrograph of individual skeletal muscle fibers. They've been pulled apart a little bit so that you can see the details of each cell. So each of these green lines is one muscle fiber that's running across the micrograph here. And again, we're not seeing the entire cell. It gets cut off at the edge of the micrograph here. And the blue ovals that you see scattered throughout the green here, each of these little blue ovals is a nucleus. And this is just one cell right here, and it has tons of nuclei all along the length, showing you that, again, we have multiple nuclei in each skeletal muscle fiber, skeletal muscle cell. And you can also see the striations here. Here they're running across in this direction, and you can see bands of lighter green and then a darker kind of bluish green. Those are the striations or banding patterns, again caused by the arrangement of the actin and myosin filaments in the sarcomeres. Here are some more micrographs. These are more like what we will see on our slides. Ours are often stained with a pink stain like this, or sometimes they'll be stained with a darker black stain. And you can see again here those striations, those light and dark banding patterns along the cell. And you can see that the cells are arranged parallel to each other. So we've got all those cells running along here. And here we've also got longitudinal sections where we're looking at the length of the cell, and transverse or cross sections where we cut that muscle cell in half. Actually, these are, of course, multiple muscle cells here, and we're looking at that cut portion. So these cells would be coming out of the screen towards you. And again, note that you have lots of nuclei per each muscle cell. And if you look at the cross section, you can see that those nuclei are at the edges. They're not in the center of the cell. Here's another micrograph. And here on the right-hand side, we really zoom in on that muscle fiber so you can really see the light and dark banding. You've got almost a white section and then a darker reddish black section here. And that runs all along the length of this cell. Again, those are those striations caused by the arrangement of the actin and myosin filaments. All right, a few important things that you'll need to know about skeletal muscle is that it is voluntary. It's under your conscious control. So you can think about whether to move your arm, right? You can think about whether to talk or not. So it's voluntary. And that happens because these skeletal muscles are under the control of motor nerves. Each skeletal muscle cell has its own individual attachment to a motor neuron. And without nervous system stimulation, if they're not getting signals from these motor neurons, the muscle will atrophy or shrink. You've probably noticed this if you've been sick for a long time and haven't been able to get up and move about. Your muscles tend to get smaller and weaker. That's the muscle atrophying. Or if you break an arm or a leg and it's in a cast for a while, so it's immobilized and you can't move it, you'll notice when you take off the cast that your arm or leg is smaller than the other arm or leg, as far as like width-wise, the width of the muscle, because again, that muscle has shrunk or atrophied. And skeletal muscles are able to regenerate themselves, and that's dependent on satellite cells, which are the precursors to skeletal muscles. And they are mononuclear. They have only one nucleus, and they will fuse together to form the longer muscle fibers. Here is a micrograph of a neuron connecting to some skeletal muscles. So here the neuron is these lines here running across, that's part of the neuron, and then you'll see these little kind of dotted granular looking things. Those are the motor end plates. Those are the parts of the neuron that are connecting with the muscle cell. And that's what's going to send the signal from the neuron to the muscle cell to tell it to contract. We will be talking about nerve cells more in the next class, but this is an important point to recognize, and an important micrograph to see is where these nerves are attaching to the muscles. The nerve-muscle junction here. Here's another micrograph. This is using a scanning electron microscope, and here we can really see in detail that nerve coming in and attaching to that muscle fiber right here. Here's one attachment right here, and then there is another right over here. These are called motor end plates, where the nerve meets the muscle fiber. This is the muscle tissue lecture quiz. Question 3. Why is skeletal muscle tissue striated? A. Muscle cells alternate in a striped pattern. B. Muscle tissue contraction leads to repetitive cracks in the tissue. C. It is due to alternating bands of actin and myosin protein fibers. Or D. Skeletal muscle tissue isn't striated. Go ahead and pause the video here while you write down your answer. So in review, skeletal muscle is the tissue in your skeletal muscles, the muscles that are attached to your skeleton. These are the ones under your voluntary or conscious control. Each skeletal muscle fiber has multiple nuclei, and the skeletal muscles also have striations or bands caused by the arrangement of the actin and myosin filaments in the muscle fiber. Let's try a practice question. The only one here that is not a property of skeletal muscle cells is D, connect to each other at intercalated discs. That's actually a property of cardiac muscle cells, which we'll be talking about in the next video. That concludes this part of the lecture. This has been Bio 156, Muscle Tissue, video 2 of 4.